Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, meet a nonprofit theater company and a for-profit bar. We'll tell you how they intersect. Plus, a local biologist and her students create a research project about squirrels, what they found out. And then the story of a young journalist who clashed with political figures so much it caused a street fight. But first, how the California School for the Deaf became an extraordinary football team. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
In the fall of 2021, while working as the San Francisco bureau chief for the New York Times, Thomas Fuller discovered the extraordinary story of the Cubs, a high school football team that was dominating their opponents on their way to a league championship. Now, you might think you've heard this story before, but there's a twist.
One day I got an email that said, hey, there's this team in Southern California. For 7 decades, they haven't done so well, but they're undefeated now. The team is at the California School for the Deaf in Riverside. And I said, I gotta go check this out. I got in my car and I drove down to Riverside, and it was Friday night. Watched them, really wallop their opponents. Talked to the coach of the opposing team, who was really shaken by it. He was like, don't think that you have an advantage against this team because they're deaf. They communicate better than any team I've ever played against. And so I was hooked. I was hooked on the story.
Fuller was so hooked that he stepped away from his job at the Times to fully devote himself to follow the team on their journey throughout the season of 2022.
I spent the next season on the sidelines every day, watching their practices, going to their games, interviewing all the kids, all the coaches, and doing a deep dive into deafness. Is deafness an edge? Is it maybe not a disability? There are lots of things about deafness that make it an advantage on the football field. I found that really fascinating.
Fuller's debut book, The Boys of Riverside, a deaf football team and a quest for glory, explores these questions while following the struggles and triumphs of the players on the team.
The kids who are there now are from every imaginable background, from all over the globe. It's really like an American dream situation. And they come to the California School for the Deaf, and they're all using ASL, American Sign Language. It was this like deaf brotherhood. You want to read a great American underdog story, here you go.
Well, tell me a little bit about the book. You wrote about a high school football team from the United States.
It's 8-man ball, which is for small schools, for rural schools, for native schools, and it's a fast game, so you take out a couple linemen. It's, miss a tackle, and that might be a touchdown. It's intense, it's physical, and I loved watching it. So I looked into the science of it. I looked into the sociology of it, this idea that you have all these kids who never quite fit in when they played football on hearing teams when they were younger. You can imagine being a great athlete, hungry to play football, passionate about the game of football, but not being able to communicate with your own teammates. Then they come to the California School for the Deaf, and they're all, using ASL, American Sign Language, in a deaf brain. The brain pathways reformulate, and so people who are profoundly deaf have better vision, better eyesight, more acute eyesight than hearing people. They are essentially hearing with their eyes, and what better skill if you're playing football than to have, a vision of the field that is more acute, having peripheral vision that's better, having a detection of motion that is better. And a big part of what I looked into was how signing really helped the boys, the coaches, the team communicate in ways that confounded their hearing opponents.
Fuller reveals that the huddle in football was invented because of a deaf team. Hear that story and watch the full interview at hecmedia.org. For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
We didn't set out to open a bar at all. We came here, and it was like, it changed our dreams a little bit.
We were introduced through a mutual friend based on a original musical he had written. We were business partners first, or like we worked together first on that 2018 musical, and then through that started the theater company Fly North Theatricals, and have been working with that for several years as business partners in the nonprofit.
Fly North Theatricals is a nonprofit theater company that focuses in musical theater and promotes education through performance. There's really two sides to the company, one of which is a professional theater company with real adults who get real paychecks for musicals that are put on for the general public. And the other side is education. We teach lessons in voice, dance, and acting. We offer over $10,000 in scholarships every year to assure that kids can afford what otherwise is kind of expensive.
We initially started looking at commercial real estate with the idea that, hey, Fly North is starting to see this growth, and on that growth trajectory, there's potentially a future where we own our own space. It turned out to be this completely separate for-profit business that still has a heart towards creating space for other independent artists in St. Louis.
When we decided we were going to open a bar, I wanted to open the kind of place that people felt comfortable showing up in sandals and shorts to a theatrical show, and then like coming out and getting a stag and drinking it on the sidewalk.
The environment feels like you're in your own living room. Like, it's so comfortable, and everybody's friendly and lovely to each other. And I'm lost for words. It's wonderful.
The idea that live theater can be something that is casual and a normal part of your life, and not this other separate thing.
In the same way that Fly North has multiple revenue streams that support the theatrical side of things, the bar is a nice way to do that. Every time you're buying drinks, you're supporting a theater. We put on 4 days of events here in the bar. Mondays are open mic comedy. Tuesdays what we call open stage, which is open mic for everything except comedy. Wednesdays is drunk voice lessons, which I typically host. At its heart, it's karaoke with a live piano accompaniment, but because I'm a voice teacher, we stop and make the song better, and it's turned out to be our most popular night. January 1st, whack into the chorus, put it in your belly, chaw!
There are people that are driving in from 30 minutes away, 45 minutes away, because this is their home and this is their group of people that they like spending time with. The big bulk of what happens in the theater is producers coming in, doing anything they want. There's a low rental fee that is below market rate. Single night comedy, drag, burlesque. We've had poetry readings, we've had drag shows, we've had poetry readings that turned into drag shows.
I was even surprised that how many bands have wanted to book the space.
And then the weeklies are more geared toward plays or musicals or whatnot. And we're booked up through the rest of the year, booking for 2025 already. The third fold thing, which is a little smaller, we put on events in there occasionally, like an event called Shakespeare Speed Run. There's a wide range of stuff that happens in that room.
When we decided to commit to, we're gonna open a community space that's gonna be a bar, we're like, what would we want out of a community space? And we're like, we're gonna be open every night of the week. We're gonna stick to that. We're gonna stay open the hours we said we're gonna be open, whether it's busy or not. And also being in the theater world, after rehearsals, after a show, everyone's always looking for, where can I get a drink and a snack? And we're like, we don't have a full kitchen, but we got a pizza oven, and we don't shut it off until last call. So you can always wander in and get yourself a Dogtown pizza and get fed late at night. We happened to open on a Monday, and because of the leap year, our 1-year anniversary was a Wednesday, which for us worked out because drunk voice lessons has been super duper popular. So we kind of thought, hey, 1-year anniversary is coming up. We should have some sort of party about it. And it's going to be a big celebration of making it to a year of being in business. We're moving on the right track.
HEC has been bringing you positive programming and award-winning content for decades. Arts, education, culture, in-depth discussions, films, and more. All in one place, hecmedia.org.
Squirrels in Missouri scurry for black walnuts, Missouri's official state tree nut, among other foods. Squirrels dash and dine wherever they please. They are everywhere and showing up a lot on cameras installed by the St. Louis Wildlife Project. So then, why shouldn't the stars of the show get their very own research project?
Full disclosure, we also chose squirrels because we had a lot of data on squirrels. Because they're so common, we have a lot of data. Whereas if you choose something that is more rare or is just not detected as often, say like a coyote, we're not going to have enough data points to do a good analysis.
Whitney Anthony Sawmy is an associate professor of biology at University Health Sciences and Pharmacy in St. Louis, UHSP, and co-principal investigator of the St. Louis Wildlife Project. More than 40 locations in the St. Louis area have motion-activated camera traps. Anthony Sawmy's undergraduate biology students at UHSP engage in the photo tagging process. At UHSP, undergraduate research participation is a priority. So, UHSP students lead the St. Louis Squirrel Project, analyzing a full year of data for the paper.
Being here at UHSP, it's really a privilege to get to be part of the education and training of these students. And there are 2 undergraduate student co-authors on a peer-reviewed publication as, undergraduate students.
She says because squirrels are so common, they are an easy daily connection for everyone to make with nature, including the students involved in the project. So then why the interest in studying squirrels? It started with a basic observation.
We actually have 2 species in St. Louis. We have the eastern gray squirrel and we have the fox squirrel. We initially noticed when we began photo tagging our images was that we seem to have gray squirrels everywhere, but rarely do we find fox squirrels. And so we wanted to look at this a little bit more closely. This was interesting to us because we have these 2 squirrel species, both widely distributed throughout the state, both considered to be common, but why is one way more common in the urban areas and the other one only found in the more rural areas? For gray squirrels, we had over 12,000 detections across our urbanization gradient, across our transect. For fox squirrels, we only had around 300 photos. So that's a pretty big difference. We also found that gray squirrels were being found detected throughout our transect. So from highly urban to suburban to rural areas, they're just ubiquitous.
The research examines why fox squirrels are far less likely to be found in areas with high urban intensity and are essentially getting pushed out.
The gray squirrels are out competing fox squirrels, and this very well could be driven by how humans are using the landscape. So in more urban areas, more suburban areas, there are presumably more bird feeders, for example. And so it could be that because gray squirrels are better at using these sorts of human resources, that they are excluding fox squirrels from these areas and displacing them from areas where maybe they might have inhabited. They've become very good at eating from bird feeders and finding food resources in trash cans. And then how can this information that we're collecting be useful for urban planning, for wildlife ecologists, for habitat managers?
Understanding what's happening with squirrel populations may seem like such a small thing, but students are learning there are many good reasons to pay attention.
Squirrels are important links in these ecological food webs. And in the fall, they bury acorns and other nuts in the ground. They're very important for distribution and dispersal of tree species as well. And so they're just a really important, cool link in the ecosystem, and I think that's often overlooked.
Later on Spotlight, live from the Boom Room with Kip and JJ Loui.
shelter from the storm.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. Loring Pickering, a young journalist from New Hampshire, moved to St. Louis in the 1840s, where he clashed with prominent political figures over issues like slavery. One of these disputes escalated into a comical, yet heated street fight. Chris Gordon, MHS Director of Library and Collections, tells the story.
So in the 1840s, there's a young man by the name of Loring Pickering who moves to St. Louis from New Hampshire, and he purchases the Daily Union newspaper, which was closely associated with what was the dominant political machine in Missouri known as the Central Clique. Members of the Central Clique, they were very pro-Southern, very pro-slavery. So it's a little unusual that a New Englander would associate himself with pro-slavery, but that's what Pickering did. In 1849, the senior senator from Missouri was Thomas Hart Benton. Benton was very concerned that the slavery issue, that is, those who wanted to spread slavery even further west into the Western territories, that was going to hurt the economic environment of the American West. And so even though Benton was a slave owner himself, he basically switches sides. And because of this, the Central Clique goes after him. And Loring Pickering begins to print all these anti-Benton op-eds in the local paper, in the Daily Union, and so forth. This catches the attention of Francis Frank Blair Jr., who was a very close ally of Benton. Blair himself was very well connected. His father was one of the most influential newspaper men in the United States, close friend of President Andrew Jackson, advisor to presidents and so forth. So Blair had a lot of clout himself. Pickering knew this. Pickering begins to attack him in the press as well, alongside Benton. Well, Blair was known as being kind of short-tempered. He endured it for a while. Finally, he'd had enough of all these political attacks, and he challenges Pickering to a duel. And so, on an early March day in 1849, Frank Blair and his brother Montgomery are walking down 2nd Street when they see Loring Pickering approaching them. Both sets of individuals had umbrellas with them. And as Pickering is passing, Blair tried to push him or jostle him out into the street. Pickering stumbles back several steps, and then Blair takes his umbrella and jabs Pickering in the face. At this point, both men raised their umbrellas and began pummeling each other in the street while all these spectators are watching these two grown men have a duel with their umbrellas. Finally, Montgomery Blair, Frank's brother, steps in, pulls them apart, and they go on their way. Several days go by, and then something very mysterious happens. Frank Blair, who is an attorney, is leaving the old courthouse one evening, and they had still not lit the gas streetlights in downtown St. Louis. He's walking down the courthouse steps when suddenly a figure steps out from one of the columns and fires 2 shots at him. Blair turns around, pulls out his own gun, fires back, but the individual has raced away into the dark. But Blair is convinced that it is Pickering. He takes this to the authorities, who take it to a grand jury, but ultimately the prosecutors determine they cannot prosecute Pickering, and he is free to go. Pickering almost immediately sells the newspaper. He leaves St. Louis and he goes out to the gold fields of California, where he became a very prominent citizen of San Francisco, even ran for mayor of San Francisco at one point. Frank Blair goes on to have a very large role in St. Louis history. In 1856, he's elected to Congress. Then Blair was very involved in the Civil War and then post-Civil War politics. And today, if you want to see Frank Blair, all you have to do is go to the corner of Lindell and Kings Highway, and his statue stands there looking over Forest Park.
Next on History Spotlight, how the Hill neighborhood played a large role in the appearance of St. Louis.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
The light on the wet ink, the sound that the brayer makes when it's putting the ink on type, and then the impression that the paper makes onto that type leaves a tactile impression on the paper.
I'm Marie Oberkirsch, Director of Central Print.
The smell of the ink in the room when you open the door, you know that you're in a creative space. Once the ink is applied to the text, the paper's put face down, and you roll the impression cylinder across. And it doesn't look like much until you peel that paper up and reveal the transfer of ink to paper, and it's miraculous. You can set wood type boldly, just 4 letters, put some ink on, and make your statement. Or you can set a poem with an 8-point typeface that's pretty meticulously set. I remember growing up in the 70s, and I'd open up a newspaper. I could smell the ink. That day of paper and ink seems to be fleeting, but a lot of the equipment and technology is still relevant today. So we acquire equipment that needs preservation and conservation, and then we make it accessible to printers and artisans who'd like to use it. You'll see in a lot of movie trailers and things type that's been distressed to look old, like maybe in an old Western film clip. And what you'll find here in the shop is how that type really is distressed. The scratches that are from a ring that somebody might have been wearing, or a crush mark if somebody stacked another font on top of it, or a crack in the wood. But I think even more fun to think about is the kerning process and the attention to detail that you can have when you're actually handling each type, character, and letter form. There are thin pieces of metal that you can put in between. Leading is something that you might use in your computer program, but here it's a literal piece of lead, and it comes in various thicknesses, and you can cut it to size. And even beyond that, there are coppers and brasses that are thinner, brasses being a little thicker than coppers, so you can get super fine. We do have the collection of the Lebanon Advertiser here that was all newspaper typesetting equipment, so large fonts for headlines. So if you want some bigger metal types, you can find them here.
This is our St. Louis Type Foundry Washington hand press. It came from the Lebanon Advertiser, and when we received it, this block was on the press bed talking about FDR's third term. So that was a fun reprint that we were able to make here. But just to show you the action of the press, we would hand ink, place the paper on top, and then turn this wooden cylinder. There are leather straps and rails, just like ice skates and oil. So it's a beautiful transition to lock that press bed into place. And then you pull the platen down. Big print area and fantastic pressure to make your print. 1860 is probably the oldest equipment that we have here in the shop, and all the way up through the 20s and 30s and 40s. One example that really comes to mind are all the foreign language newspapers that were printed here. We have examples from a Polish newspaper that was here in the neighborhood up in Old North St. Louis. We know that the mother and daughter were still publishing the paper in the basement in the late 60s. Running an intertype and making sure that that publication made it out. We do love Old North St. Louis. Something too that we love is just as you look south to the Arch grounds, you can see where a lot of those type foundries and printing presses would have been back in the day before the Arch was built. We do feel that Central Print is grounded in St. Louis's history, and our location supports that as well. From the print shops that were right here in the neighborhood to the Arch grounds that we look down upon, all of the trains and riverboats would have brought materials and supplies, so St. Louis was really a big hub for getting type and letterpress equipment and print out to the world. Book arts is flourishing, so a lot of people are doing zines that are
very contemporary in feel, but this equipment still works well for that. Wood type, metal type, cutting images out of linoleum block carvings and printing them to express yourself and create a zine that's all brand new content, often from equipment that's 120 years old. The tactile quality of it, the unique nature of each typeset letter, our eye recognizes that and appreciates it for what it is. It was handled by another person, artfully composed and printed. Letterpress is evocative because of the nostalgia that we feel for it, but there is something richer that's still modern and contemporary and very much about today. And I think it's the hand of the artist. You really see that in the printed page.
HEC Films. Explore, inspire, educate, and entertain. HEC Films, just one of the many facets of award-winning content you'll find at hecmedia.org.
1, 2, ready. Outside the window, the rain is falling from the sky. But here in the tavern, it's always warm and dry. You can stay as long as you pay. There's room by the fire to spare. But once you spend your last dollar, turn up your collar, it's cold out there. Here is your refuge, a shelter from the storm. Nothing's come easy since the day you were born. You can remain out of the rain on a bar stool without a care. But once you spend your last dollar, turn up your collar, it's cold out there.
Next week, an Emmy-nominated story about how police officers are healing the community in Ferguson. Plus, how Mizzou's working with the spirits industry to preserve white oak trees used in the whiskey process. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.